What if the ultimate goal of your life, and I mean absolute peace, like unshakable security and a joy so profound it doesn't even rely on anything going right in your day. What if that isn't a destination you have to travel to?
Right, like it's not a place on a map.
Exactly. What if it isn't something you can earn or buy or achieve after a lifetime of just exhausting effort? What if right now, as you are listening to this deep dive, it is a reality you already possess, entirely intact, simply hidden beneath the surface?
I mean, it completely upends our entire operating system. We are just so conditioned to believe in this if-then model of happiness.
Oh, for sure. The whole if I get this, then I'll be happy thing.
Yeah. If I get the promotion, then I'll be secure. If I find the right relationship, then I'll be at peace. To even entertain the idea that the peace is already fully established within us, it requires a massive cognitive shift.
And that cognitive shift is exactly what we are attempting today. So we are looking at a stack of sources centered around a single, profoundly rich text. It's called the Jiva Yatra, which translates to the soul's journey.
Authored by Sri Janananda Farati.
Right. And specifically, we are diving deep into verse 6 today. And what strikes me immediately about this text is that it acts almost like a surgical roadmap. Like, it isn't offering vague, feel-good spiritual platitudes. It is intensely systematic.
Very systematic. The author understands the human mind with an almost frightening precision. I mean, before we even reach verse 6, the text has already established a critical premise about the so-called journey of the soul.
Because the word journey usually implies physical movement.
Exactly. Packing bags, crossing borders, maybe retreating to a silent ashram on a mountain somewhere. But the Jiva Yatra is explicit here. The distance between you and absolute joy is not spatial.
Right, you can't buy a plane ticket to.
Can't. And it's not temporal either. You don't have to wait 20 years of rigorous meditation to arrive there. The journey being described is purely cognitive. It is a movement from ignorance to knowledge.
From ignorance to knowledge.
Yeah, it is the journey of recognizing what has been present the entire time.
That reframing alone changes everything about how we approach self-improvement, I think. But, as I was reading the breakdown of verse 6, I noticed the author does something really unusual before he actually hands us the tools for this cognitive journey.
He hits the brakes.
He does. He's been laying out these foundational concepts, getting the students ready to learn about intense mental focus and meditation, which the text calls upasana yoga. But right on the precipice of that dense, complex topic, he forces a deliberate pause in the teaching.
He does, and it's not just a casual break. It's a highly specific traditional pedagogical technique. In Sanskrit, it's known as simhavalokananyaya.
Okay, simhavalokananya.
Yeah, so simha means lion, and avalokana means looking back. It's the concept of the lion's backward glance.
The lion's backward glance. I love the imagery there.
It's powerful, right? Think about how a lion moves through a dense forest or a vast savanna. It doesn't just march forward blindly with his head down.
Right, it's taking everything in.
Exactly. Every so often, the lion stops, turns its massive head, and looks back over the territory it just traversed. It takes stock of the totality of its environment. It establishes its current location in relation to where it began.
Wow.
And the author of the Jiva Yatra is using this exact instinct in a philosophical context. He knows his students are highly intelligent, but he also knows how easily human beings get lost in the mechanics of a practice and completely forget the purpose of it.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you think about hiking a grueling, complex trail, there are moments where you are just staring at your boots.
Just trying to survive the next step.
Yeah, you're trying not to trip over roots, you're tracking your heart rate, you're totally consumed by the immediate effort. But before you pivot onto a steep, unfamiliar switchback, you have to force yourself to stop.
You have to look back.
You turn around, look out over the valley, and visually trace the winding dirt path you just conquered. You have to reorient yourself on the map, or else you run the risk of just walking in circles. But looking at verse 6, why is the author forcing this pause right now? What is the specific danger we're facing?
The danger is that we are on the verge of slipping right back into our default conditioning. You see, the author is about to teach meditation and mental focus. And the immediate trap for the human mind is to turn meditation into just another treadmill.
Oh, totally. We gamify it.
We do. We think, okay, if I do this meditation practice perfectly, if I focus hard enough for long enough, I will eventually produce or earn liberation. The text calls this liberation moksha, or Nityananda, eternal joy.
Right.
So the lion's backward glance is used to violently pull the student back to the core thesis,
Yeah.
which is that moksha is not a future destination. You cannot produce it, you cannot earn it.
Because if you view it as a destination, you are fundamentally misunderstanding your own nature.
Precisely. In the Vedantic tradition, moksha is our svarupa. That means our intrinsic, fundamental nature. It is what we are actually made of.
Okay, wow.
If we forget that, the entire spiritual pursuit just collapses. It stops being a path of liberation and becomes just another stressful, competitive, worldly pursuit. We basically trade the anxiety of climbing the corporate ladder for the anxiety of climbing the spiritual ladder.
The anxiety of climbing the spiritual ladder, that is such a trap. It's like the person who gets furious when someone interrupts their morning meditation because they feel like their peace was stolen from them.
Yes, exactly.
If your peace can be stolen by a ringing doorbell, it wasn't absolute peace to begin with, right? It was just a temporary state you manufactured.
And that is the crux of the lion's glance. The problem we are trying to solve is not a lack of peace. It's not that moksha is absent. Our problem is that it is covered up, it is concealed. Our orientation must shift from acquiring something new to excavating what is already there.
Okay, so if we follow that logic, if I'm already a reservoir of infinite peace, but my day-to-day reality consists of stressing over deadlines, getting irritated in traffic, and feeling this low-grade hum of anxiety about the future, then there must be something incredibly dense blocking my access to that peace.
Absolutely.
And the text doesn't shy away from this at all. It explicitly categorizes these roadblocks. It maps out 3 distinct layers of obstacles that conceal our true nature. Let's dig into these, starting from the outside in. If we are doing an excavation, what is the grossest, most superficial layer of dirt we hit first?
The text calls this outermost layer malam. The literal translation of malam is dirt, impurity, or a stain. But psychologically, in the context of our daily lives, malam represents our emotional turbulence.
The day-to-day chaos.
Yeah, it is the gross mental reactivity that pulls us violently in different directions. The text specifically defines this through pairs of opposites. So you have raga and vesha, which mean our intense attachments and aversions.
Okay.
It also points to kama and krota, which are burning desire and anger.
So malam is basically the sheer chaos of wanting things to be different than they are. It's the visceral pull of desire when you see something you want, and the visceral push of anger when you encounter something you hate.
Yes. Think of a mind heavily coated in malam as a mind entirely at the mercy of the external world. When the environment is favorable, the mind swings upward into elation and attachment.
We feel great.
But when the environment is unfavorable, it plummets into frustration, despair, or rage.
I'm just picturing the psychological toll of that. It's exhausting. Like if my mind is completely wrapped up in a bitter resentment toward a coworker, or if I am obsessively, desperately clinging to a relationship that is failing, that emotional noise is so deafening that I couldn't possibly hear the quiet reality of my intrinsic peace. The dirt is just too thick.
It creates a constant state of agitation. The mind is boiling, and a boiling mind cannot reflect the truth of the self, just like a boiling lake cannot reflect the moon.
That's a beautiful image.
So the first task is to settle that emotional boiling. But the text is very clear. Removing malam is only the first step. Suppose you do the psychological work. You regulate your nervous system. You manage your anger. You temper your extreme desires.
You're feeling pretty zen.
You are sitting quietly in a room, relatively content. You have removed the gross dirt. But you will immediately encounter the second, subtler layer of obstacle beneath it.
This is where it gets really interesting because I think a lot of people assume just being calm is the finish line. What is the second layer?
The second layer is called vikshipadua. This translates to the defect of distraction or extrovertedness. This is the inherently restless, wandering nature of the mind. You might not be furious, and you might not be burning with desire, but your mind is still buzzing. It's fragmented.
I feel like vikshepa is the defining disease of the modern age. I mean, our entire technological infrastructure is designed to exploit and amplify this specific layer of dirt.
It absolutely is. Vikshepa is the inability of the mind to stay anchored. It is the constant projection of attention outward or into hypothetical realities. You're sitting on a couch, perfectly safe, no immediate threats, no burning angers.
Right. Physically, you're fine.
Completely fine. Yet your mind jumps to a conversation you had 5 years ago, then to a worry about a meeting next Tuesday, then to an urge to check your phone, then to a random memory of a commercial you saw as a child.
It's the mental equivalent of having 50 tabs open on a web browser. Music is playing from one of them, a video is buffering on another, an ad is popping up on a third, and you are frantically clicking around trying to find the source of the noise.
That is perfect.
You aren't experiencing the acute suffering of intense grief or rage. You aren't deep in malam, but you are completely alienated from yourself because your attention is fractured into 1,000 pieces.
That is the perfect analogy for vikshipa. The mind is scattered, and a scattered mind cannot perceive the subtlety of its own intrinsic nature. It is too busy engaging with its own projections.
So it's like a static on a radio.
Yes. So we have the heavy emotional mud of malam and the buzzing, scattered distraction of vikshipa. But there's one more layer.
The core, the foundation of the problem. Let's say I manage to cool my emotional reactivity, and then, through immense effort, I train my attention. I quiet the buzzing, I close the browser tabs, my mind is calm and focused. What is left?
What remains is the deepest, subtlest, and most fundamental obstacle. It's called avaranam.
Avaranam.
Avaranam means a veil, or concealment. In this context, it is sheer self-ignorance. It is the root blindness to who and what we actually are.
Ignorance, that sounds almost too simple, but it's not a lack of academic knowledge, right? It's like an existential amnesia.
Exactly. It's an error in identity. You could have a mind that is perfectly emotionally regulated and capable of laser-like focus, but if that focused, calm mind still fundamentally believes, I am a mortal, limited physical entity entirely bound by the parameters of this body and this localized ego, then the veil of avaranam is still firmly in place.
You're just a very calm, focused prisoner.
Basically, yes, you have a highly polished focus instrument, but you are still operating under a hallucination of limitation. You are still completely ignorant of your limitless nature, your moksha.
To really drive home how this hallucination works, how this layer of avaranam creates real suffering out of pure illusion, the sources highlight a classic Vedantic teaching parable. It's the story of the 10th man. And I think unpacking this story reveals the exact mechanics of our own anxiety. How does the story go?
It is a brilliant illustration of how ignorance functions. The story goes that 10 men are traveling together on a long journey. They come across a wide, fast-flowing, treacherous river that they must cross to continue.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. They plunge in, battling the currents, and eventually all of them manage to drag themselves onto the opposite bank. They are exhausted, but the leader of the group realizes he needs to do a head count to ensure everyone survived the crossing.
Which is a perfectly rational thing to do. The environment was dangerous, the threat was real.
Completely rational. So the leader lines the other men up in front of him and begins to count. He points to the first man 1, the next 2. He continues down the line. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Oh no.
Stops. He looks around frantically. He only counts 9 men. Panic immediately sets in. He screams that they have lost a brother to the river.
The sheer terror of that moment.
Another man, thinking the leader made a mistake, says, "Let me count." He lines everyone up, including the leader, and begins to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So they're both getting 9.
The result is exactly the same. The realization washes over the group. The 10th man is gone. They all collapse onto the riverbank. They begin to weep bitterly, tearing at their clothes, mourning the tragic death of their dear friend.
I want to pause right here and look at their suffering, because to those men sitting on the riverbank, their grief is 100% authentic. Their nervous systems are in a state of severe trauma. They are experiencing the physical reality of loss, but the cause of that physical reality is a complete phantom.
That is the crucial point. Their suffering is entirely real to them, but the foundation of their suffering is objectively false. It is rooted purely in ignorance. Now, as they are weeping, a wise traveler happens to walk by. He sees these 10 men crying and asks the leader what tragedy has occurred.
The poor traveler is probably so confused.
Right. The leader, through his tears, explains, "We were 10 men who crossed this river, but the current was too strong. One of us is drowned. We've counted twice, and we can only find 9.
The traveler must be looking at them like they're completely insane.
The traveler immediately grasps the air. He looks at the group, smiles gently, and says to the leader, "Stand everyone in a line, including yourself." The traveler walks up to the first man and points to him. 1. He points to the next 2. He proceeds down the line, counting each man, until he reaches the leader who had initiated the original count.
Okay.
The traveler plants his finger directly at the center of the leader's chest and says, "And you are the 10th man."
Boom. The absolute collapse of the illusion.
In a fraction of a second, the grief vanishes. The mourning turns to joyous relief. What had happened? The leader, in his intense extroverted focus, his vikshepa, had counted everyone outside of himself. He had forgotten to count himself.
He was looking everywhere in the external world for the 10th man. He thought the 10th man was miles away at the bottom of the river.
But the 10th man wasn't lost. He wasn't drowned. He wasn't even an inch away. The distance between the seeking leader and the lost 10th man was exactly 0. The only distance was the distance of ignorance.
This maps so perfectly onto the human search for absolute peace, for moksha. We are the weeping men on the riverbank. We feel an acute sense of lack. We feel that something vital is missing from our lives. Peace, security, wholeness. Yeah. And so we project that missing 10th man out into the world. We think the peace is at the bottom of the river. We think the peace is in the next tax bracket, or in a new romantic partner, or in achieving a certain physical appearance. We are desperately counting everything outside of ourselves, mourning our lack of wholeness.
And just like the men in the story, our suffering is genuinely felt. But it is fundamentally based on an error of attention. The peace we are seeking is the one who is doing the submitting. The text uses this parable to establish a profound philosophical rule.
Which is?
When a problem is caused purely by ignorance, no amount of physical action can solve it. If the 10th man was actually at the bottom of the river, the solution would require action diving in, swimming, searching. But because the 10th man was already present and merely forgotten, action is useless. The distance of ignorance can only be traversed by knowledge.
The traveler didn't hand the leader a new friend. He didn't give him anything he didn't already have. He just removed the veil of Avaranam by pointing the leader's attention back at himself.
Exactly. Knowledge removes the veil. But returning to our roadmap, for that knowledge to actually land to be recognized, the mind must be prepared. The leader in the story was able to hear the traveler because he was willing to listen. If his mind was too clouded by the hysteria of Malam or the scattered panic of Vikshepa, he might have ignored the traveler entirely.
Which brings us to how we actually conceptualize our own condition. When we list out these obstacles, emotional turbulence, fractured distraction, root ignorance, it can feel incredibly heavy. It can feel like a devastating performance review of the human psyche.
It's a lot to confront.
It is. It's easy to look at that list and think, I am fundamentally broken. I am just a walking ball of dirty, distracted ignorance.
It's a very common reaction to spiritual texts. They outline our flaws so clearly that we mistake those flaws for our identity.
But the sources offer a vital reassurance here. These obstacles are not permanent structural flaws in our architecture. They are not who we are. They are simply layers resting on top of who we are. And to help us visualize this relationship between our true nature and these covering layers, the text provides 2 absolutely stunning analogies. Let's look at the first one, which actually originates from the Chandogya Upanishad. It is the analogy of the hidden treasure, or Hiranyanidhi.
This is one of the most evocative metaphors in the tradition. The Upanishad asks us to imagine a man who lives on a small, barren plot of land. He is destitute. For his entire life, day after day, he sits on the dusty edge of his property with a wooden bowl, begging for scraps of food from passing travelers.
Just scraping by.
He begs for copper coins just to survive the week. He lives in a state of perpetual anxiety, humiliation, and lack. Eventually, he dies, having lived a life defined entirely by poverty.
A completely tragic existence.
But here is the profound twist. Unbeknownst to him, buried just a few feet beneath the very dirt where he sat begging every single day, was a massive, unfathomable treasure of gold, a Hiranyanidhi. It belonged to him. It was on his land. It was there the whole time.
Wow.
But because it was concealed by a few layers of mud, rock, and clay, he never experienced it.
So his suffering, his lifetime of starvation and anxiety, wasn't actually caused by poverty. He was, objectively speaking, astronomically wealthy. His suffering was caused entirely by the concealment of his wealth. The dirt blocked his access to what was already his.
And the text points out that this beggar is exactly who we are when we operate under the veil of ignorance. Our intrinsic nature, moksha, is the Hiranyanidhi, the infinite reservoir of joy, security, and peace. We are sitting on it. It is our birthright.
But we can't see it.
No, because our awareness is covered by the mud of our emotional reactivity, the malam, and the rocks of our scattered attention, the vikshepa. So we are completely blind to it.
And what happens when you don't know you have the gold? You pick up the begging bowl.
Exactly. We become psychological beggars. We beg the external world for tiny scraps of happiness. We beg our boss for a crumb of validation. We beg our spouses to make us feel lovable. We beg social media algorithms for a momentary hit of dopamine through likes and views. We are endlessly rattling our little bowls, desperate for pennies, completely ignorant of the infinite wealth beneath our own feet.
Rattling our little bowls, desperate for pennies, completely ignorant of the infinite wealth beneath our own feet. That fundamentally shifts how I view my own desires. Every time I feel that desperate, grasping need for an external circumstance to perfectly align so that I can feel okay, I am just the beggar sitting on the gold mine. My problem isn't that I need more pennies from the world. My problem is that I need to start digging.
Which leads perfectly into the second analogy the text offers to explain this process of digging or revealing our true nature. This is the analogy of the sculptor and the rock.
This one really challenges our modern obsession with building ourselves. Let's say a sculptor brings a massive, rough, dirty block of stone into his studio. He takes his hammer and chisel, and over weeks and months, he works the stone. Eventually, what stands in the studio is a breathtakingly beautiful, intricately detailed idol of a deity, let's say Lord Krishna.
Okay.
Now, common sense tells us that the sculptor created Krishna out of the rock, he built the idol. But the Vedantic perspective looks at that process entirely differently.
The philosophical view is that the sculptor did not create anything. The perfect, beautiful form of Krishna was already entirely present inside that block of stone from the very beginning. The sculptor's only function was subtraction.
Subtraction.
His job was to use his chisels to chip away all the layers of rock that were not Krishna. He didn't add divinity to the stone. He merely removed the excess material that was concealing the masterpiece.
The masterpiece was pre-installed, the effort was just in the uncovering. And the sources point out incredible, almost humorous irony in how we treat the rock before and after this process of subtraction.
The irony is stark. Before the sculptor does his work, when the stone is just a rough, uncarved boulder sitting by the side of the road or in a quarry, it has no perceived value. People walk right past it, crows land on it, dogs relieve themselves against it.
It's just debris.
It is treated as completely ordinary, even bothersome. But once the sculptor chips away the excess rock and reveals the masterpiece within, the entire dynamic changes.
The rock's status shifts entirely.
It goes from the side of the road to the inner sanctum of a grand temple. It is placed on an altar. It receives daily a Pishikam sacred ritual bathing with milk, honey, and sandalwood paste. People travel from hundreds of miles away, standing in line for hours just to catch a brief glimpse of it. They bow down in reverence to it.
And what changed?
The core substance didn't change at all. It is still the exact same stone. The only difference is the removal of the covering.
If I apply this directly to the human experience, it is an incredibly profound and somewhat heartbreaking realization. Are we essentially walking around treating ourselves and treating everyone around us like those uncarved boulders on the side of the road? We look at ourselves in the mirror and we see the rough edges, the flaws, the anxieties. We feel unworthy. We let the crows sit on us. But this text is asserting, as a matter of absolute fact, that the masterpiece, the divine idol, is already perfectly formed inside us.
It is not a metaphor for potential. It is a statement of current reality. The divinity is already fully present. You are the hidden masterpiece.
But if I accept that my job is not to frantically build a better version of myself, but rather to be the sculptor who chips away the excess, I immediately hit a practical wall. A sculptor uses physical steel chisels to remove physical granite. If I am the rock, and my layers of excess are psychological, the malam of emotional reactivity and the vikshepa of mental distraction, how do I actually do the chipping? What are the psychological chisels, and where exactly is this work taking place?
To understand the tools, we first have to understand the workshop. We have to understand the specific environment where this spiritual revelation occurs. And the text explains this through a remarkably practical metaphor, which we can call the blackboard analogy.
Right, because ultimately the innermost layer we are trying to remove is aranam, ignorance. And ignorance can only be destroyed by knowledge, and knowledge in any tradition is usually imparted by a teacher. So the text brings us into the classroom of spiritual learning to explain why so many of us hear these profound truths, but they never actually change us.
Exactly. The text asks us to envision the process of a spiritual teacher attempting to impart the ultimate truth to a student. Let's say the truth the teacher wants to convey is the great Upanishadic Mahavakya, Tattvam Asi, which translates to, "Thou art that," meaning, you are the limitless reality.
Okay, thou art that.
Imagine the teacher is standing at the front of a classroom, holding a piece of chalk, ready to write this ultimate liberating truth on a blackboard for the student to read, understand, and internalize. The text asserts that for this transfer of knowledge to actually work, two mandatory conditions must be met regarding that specific blackboard.
And just to be clear for you listening, the blackboard in this analogy is a metaphor for the student's mind. The intellect.
Yes, the mind is the blackboard. Condition number 1, the blackboard must be clean. Imagine a blackboard that hasn't been erased in months. It is covered in complex, chaotic scribbles, old math equations, history notes, aggressive doodles from previous classes.
In a total mess.
If the teacher takes their chalk and tries to write the pristine truth of Tatev Amasi directly over all of that chaotic noise, what is the result?
It's just more noise. It's an illegible mess. You wouldn't be able to distinguish the liberating truth from a scribbled algebra equation.
Precisely. In our internal landscape, an unclean board represents a mind heavily burdened by malam. It is a mind covered in the thick dirt of unresolved emotional turbulence. It is the anger you are harboring toward a family member, the deep resentments you carry from your past, the burning, desperate desires for status or revenge.
Yeah.
If your mind is currently boiling with hatred for a coworker and a teacher tries to tell you, you are the infinite peace of the universe, the teaching cannot land. The emotional noise completely drowns out the subtle truth. The truth just becomes another scribble on a dirty board. So, the first condition is non-negotiable. The board must be scrubbed clean. The malum must be managed.
That tracks perfectly with human psychology. You cannot force profound philosophical insight into a nervous system that is in a state of fight or flight. The cup is full of mud. You can't pour clean water into it and expect a refreshing drink. Okay, so let's say I do the heavy lifting. I process my grudges. I regulate my emotions. I wipe the board completely spotless. Is the teacher ready to write?
The teacher is still not ready, because there is a second condition. The blackboard cannot be unmoored. Imagine this perfectly clean blackboard is not attached to the wall, but is instead hanging from the ceiling by 2 loose ropes, swinging wildly back and forth in a strong breeze.
Just flapping in the wind.
Yes. Even though the board is clean, if the teacher approaches it with a piece of chalk and tries to write, the chalk will just skip erratically across the swinging surface. The writing will be jagged, incomplete, and impossible to decipher. For the writing to be legible, the board must be clamped firmly to the wall. It must be steady.
And this swinging board is the perfect representation of vikshipa, the defect of distraction.
Exactly. A clean but swinging board is a mind that is emotionally calm. No acute anger, no burning hatred, but entirely scattered and unfocused. It lacks the capacity to hold its attention on a single point.
Think about how aggressively relatable this is for anyone trying to learn or grow today. You sit down in a quiet room with a profound book, or maybe you are listening to a complex lecture. You aren't mad at anyone. Your board is relatively clean, but your mind is a swinging blackboard.
It's moving constantly.
By the time the teacher writes the word tat, thou, your attention has swung out the window and you are thinking about an email you forgot to send. By the time the teacher writes tivem art, your mind has swung back to wondering what you were going to make for dinner. The final word, asi, that never even registers. The realization completely misses you, not because you were too angry to hear it, but because your receiving instrument was too unstable to capture it.
That is the tragedy of a mind afflicted by vikshipa. The teaching is available, the truth is constantly being offered. But the internal blackboard is swinging too wildly to record the message. The mind must be clean, and it must be steady.
This classroom analogy brings us to a massive structural point in our deep dive. We've established that the blackboard is the mind. But the sources make a very specific, philosophically rigorous argument about why the mind is the focus of all this work. It challenges a huge misconception in modern spirituality. Let's look at the actual locus of spiritual knowledge.
Yes, verse 6 contains a critical phrase that anchors this entire philosophy, Satonia Maharipu. The author is describing the 2 great enemies of the spiritual seeker, the impurity of malam and the distraction of vikshepa. And he specifically and deliberately notes their location. He says these enemies are located in the seka. Sita means the mind. The enemies live in the mind.
So the dirt is a property of the mind, and the swinging is a property of the mind. The true self, the moksha, is untouched by them.
Correct. The self is always pure. The mind is what gets dirty, distracted. And the text uses a brilliant logical deduction here to explain why we must focus on the mind. I like to conceptualize it as the plate analogy.
The plate analogy, okay.
Imagine you are preparing to eat a lavish, nourishing dinner. You go to your cupboard and pull out a plate. But you notice it is covered in congealed grease and leftover food from yesterday. You take that plate to the sink, you apply harsh soap, and you scrub it rigorously until the porcelain is spotless and gleaming. Why did you dedicate time and energy to washing that specific plate?
Because I intend to put my dinner on that plate. I wouldn't spend 10 minutes meticulously scrubbing a plate, only to set it aside on the counter and eat my spaghetti directly off the wooden table. The act of cleaning implies usage.
Precisely. You cleanse the receptacle specifically because that is where the nourishment is going to be placed. The text argues that the scriptures spend an enormous amount of time instructing us to rigorously wash and steady the mind, to remove the dirt of malam and the swinging of vikshepa. Therefore, if we are instructed to prep the mind, the ultimate spiritual knowledge must take place in the mind. The mind is the plate. The knowledge of moksha is the food. The locus of spiritual realization is the human intellect.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least wrestle with this, because this feels like it flies in the face of so much pop culture wellness advice today. If you go to a typical yoga retreat or scroll through modern spiritual content, the prevailing narrative is often deeply anti-intellectual. You hear phrases like, you have to transcend the mind, or the intellect is the enemy of enlightenment, or truth is found in the silent gap between thoughts where the mind is turned off. But this text, which is an ancient, revered cornerstone of spiritual psychology, is saying the exact opposite. It is saying enlightenment is an intellectual event.
It is saying exactly that, and it is arguably the most crucial distinction in Vedanta. The idea that we must destroy the mind or transcend the intellect to find truth is a widespread and often very confusing misunderstanding of Eastern philosophy.
Really?
To validate your pushback, the sources explicitly quote a modern master of this tradition, Swami Dayananda Saraswati. He addressed this anti-intellectual spiritual trend with incredible blunt clarity. He said, "Every knowledge is intellectual only. There is no dental knowledge."
No dental knowledge? I laughed out loud when I read that in the sources. It's so absurd, but it perfectly dismantles the argument. My teeth can't know things. My elbow cannot achieve enlightenment. Only my mind has the capacity to know.
It's a brilliant way to cut through the mystical fog.
Yeah.
Dayananda Swamiji was pointing out that spiritual knowledge is called spiritual, not because it happens in some ethereal, ghost-like spirit realm floating 3 feet above your physical body.
Yeah.
It is called spiritual because it is intellectual knowledge about the spirit. It is cognitive recognition of your true nature.
Right. If your mind is off, who's doing the recognizing?
Exactly. If you attempt to completely transcend or turn off the mind, where exactly is the knowledge supposed to take place? If you walk out of the classroom, you can't read what the teacher wrote on the blackboard.
Because the mind is the only instrument capable of grasping the concept, I am limitless.
Exactly. The mind, when purified of emotional dirt and steadied from distraction, is the one and only locus of this realization. It is the instrument of our liberation. It is not the ultimate enemy. It is the ultimate tool, provided we take the time to clean and calibrate it.
That is incredibly empowering. It removes the pressure to become some sort of non-human, thoughtless void in order to be peaceful. We don't have to amputate our intellect. We just have to optimize the equipment we were born with. So we understand the obstacles, the thick dirt and the swinging board. We know the mind is the blackboard that needs prepping. This brings us finally to the mechanics of the uncovering. We need the chisels to reveal the hidden masterpiece. How do we actually uproot malam, this grossest layer of emotional reactivity?
The author provides a highly specific prescription. He matches the obstacle to the tool. To remove malam, that outermost layer of intense likes, dislikes, anger, and chaotic desires, the required chisel is karma yoga.
Let's define karma yoga carefully, because this is another term that has been somewhat diluted. In the West, we often hear karma yoga and think it just means doing volunteer work on the weekends or doing nice things so that good karma comes back to us.
It is infinitely deeper than volunteering, though volunteering can be a part of it. Let's look at the words. Karma means action. Yoga, in this specific context, means a discipline or a psychological attitude. Karma yoga is the practice of performing your daily actions, whether that is writing a corporate report, raising your toddlers, cooking dinner, or fighting a legal battle, with a radical shift in your internal attitude.
What's the shift?
You act with immense dedication and skill, but you deliberately relinquish your obsessive attachment to the specific results of those actions.
You detach from the outcome.
Yes, you do your absolute best, you pour your energy into the action because it is your duty in that moment, but you accept the outcome with profound equanimity, whether that outcome is wild success or miserable failure.
If we connect this back to malam, the emotional dirt, I can see exactly why this is the antidote. What causes emotional turbulence in the first place? It's our obsessive attachment to a specific result. If I tie my entire sense of self-worth to getting a promotion at work and I don't get it, I fall into the deep malam of anger, bitterness, and depression. My mind boils.
Absolutely.
Conversely, if I do get the promotion, I fall into the malam of arrogant pride and the terrifying anxiety of eventually losing my new status. Either way, my mind is agitated. Karma Yoga intercepts that cognitive process. It says, the effort is my domain. The result belongs to the universe.
Precisely. You are short-circuiting the mechanism that generates raga, attachment, and devesha, aversion. By consistently practicing this attitude in the real world, in the friction of daily life, those extreme emotional swings begin to stabilize. The hot anger cools down. The desperate, grasping desires lose their tyrannical grip on your nervous system. The positive result of this sustained practice, the result of successfully chipping away malam, is a state the text calls chitta suddhi. Chitta means mind, and suddhi means purity, purity of mind.
The sources offer a fantastic, very tangible analogy for this phase of the work. They compare it to washing a heavily soiled piece of clothing. If you have a mechanic's uniform that is caked in thick, black grease, engine oil, and mud, you do not start the cleaning process by delicately applying a few drops of fine, expensive, lavender-scented fabric softener.
It would be a complete waste of time. The fine lotion would just sit uselessly on top of the mud. It cannot penetrate the heavy dirt.
Right. First, you have to plunge that heavy, greasy cloth into a bucket of boiling hot water, add harsh, abrasive detergent, and literally beat the gross, superficial dirt out of it against a washing rock. Karma Yoga is that initial necessary plunge into the hot water. It is active, it is engaged in the friction of the world, and it is often difficult work. It is beating the gross emotional dirt out of our system through disciplined action. It is scrubbing the old chaotic equations off the blackboard.
And this is why so many spiritual seekers fail. They want the delicate fabric softener of high philosophy, but they refuse to do the harsh scrubbing of karma yoga in their daily relationships and careers. But once you do the work, once the board is wiped clean, we can move to the next tool. Because, as we established in the classroom analogy, a clean board isn't enough if it is still swinging in the wind.
We have to clamp the blackboard to the wall. We have to uproot vikshepa, the subtler layer of extrovertedness and fragmentation. If karma yoga is the first chisel, what is the second?
To remove vikshepa, the text prescribes the chisel of upasana yoga. Upasana translates to mental worship, mental focus, or meditation. It is the rigorous practice of taking a mind that is historically accustomed to wandering outwardly through the five senses and training it to anchor continuously on a single point of concentration.
What kind of point?
This point of focus could be a divine ideal, a specific mantra, or a visualization.
So if karma yoga is the discipline of our physical actions in the outer world, upasana yoga is the discipline of our attention in our inner world.
Yes, it is essentially a gymnasium for your attention span. Through repeated daily practice, you train the mind to stay exactly where you place it. When the mind tries to swing away to a memory or a worry, you gently but firmly pull it back to the object of focus. You are clamping the swinging blackboard to the wall. And the positive result of removing vikshepa is a state called sita ekagrata. Ekagrata means one-pointedness. It is a state of profound, unbroken, laser-like focus.
Looking at these two tools together, the psychological sequence here is stunningly logical. It is a precise science of the mind. You absolutely cannot successfully focus a mind that is emotionally turbulent. If you try to bypass karma yoga and you sit down on a meditation cushion to practice intense upasana while you are internally burning with anger about a family feud, you will not be meditating.
No, you'll just be ruminating.
Exactly. You will just be sitting quietly with your eyes closed, stewing in your own rage. The dirt must go first. But conversely, you cannot absorb ultimate philosophical knowledge with a mind that is emotionally clean but completely scattered. The teacher writes tat tavamasi, and you miss the revelation because you are daydreaming. You need both chisels, and you need them in this exact order. Karma yoga to clean the board, upasana yoga to steady the board.
And once the board is clean and steady, the student is finally ready for the ultimate teaching. The veil of avaranam, the ignorance, can finally be lifted by the knowledge of the self.
Which brings us to the apex of the spiritual journey, the final phase of this process, the true purpose of meditation, or nidhityasanam, because I want to play this out to its logical conclusion. Let's ask the ultimate so what question. Let's imagine you have done the grueling work. You've practiced karma yoga for years. Your emotional extremes are beautifully balanced. Your blackboard is spotless. You've practiced upasana yoga. Your mind has the unbroken focus of a laser beam. Your board is clamped to the wall.
Okay, the setup is perfect.
Now, you sit before the text or the teacher, and the ultimate knowledge is written on your perfectly prepped mind. You are the limitless witnessing consciousness. You are the hidden masterpiece. You are the gold beneath the dirt. You read it. You comprehend it intellectually. Are you done? Have you achieved lasting moksha?
The short, somewhat frustrating answer is no. You are not done. And understanding why you are not done introduces perhaps the most vital, nuanced concept in the entire text, nididhyasana, which means deep internalization, assimilation, or continuous dwelling. Because even after gaining the clear, pristine intellectual knowledge that I am the limitless witness, not this physical body, we face an absolute mountain of historical habit.
The momentum of the slippery eye.
Exactly. For countless lifetimes, or if you prefer, for every single second of your current life since early childhood, you have identified exclusively with your localized ego. In Sanskrit, this limited ego is called the ahamkara. The ahamkara is the I that possesses a name, a job title, a specific body weight, a bank account balance, a list of achievements, and a long list of grievances. It is the mortal, vulnerable personality.
And we are deeply, biologically, and psychologically addicted to that identity. It is the only I we have ever known.
We're so deeply conditioned by it that even after our clean, steady intellect grasps the truth of our limitless nature, we snap back into the ego out of sheer gravity. The text uses a humorous but painfully accurate example to illustrate how quickly this slip occurs. A student who's been studying Vedantic texts, whose mind is relatively prepared, goes to his teacher and says, "Swamiji, the teachings are incredible. I understand them perfectly. I know that I am Brahman, the absolute limitless reality, but my wife is not all right. She's really bothering me today."
I am the infinite, unshakable cosmos, but my spouse forgot to load the dishwasher, and it is ruining my life.
Exactly. The teacher points out the glaring philosophical absurdity. Does Brahman, the absolute infinite reality of the universe, have a wife? Does Brahman get annoyed by household chores? In a fraction of a second, the student's definition of I slipped. He began the sentence speaking from the standpoint of the limitless witness, I know I am Brahman, and by the end of the exact same sentence, he had crashed right back down into the localized, irritated ego, but my wife is bothering me.
That captures the human condition perfectly. We can read a profound book, we can have a moment of deep clarity where we realize how small our daily problems are, but the moment real life strikes, a traffic jam, an unexpected bill, a rude comment, we snap right back into the ahamkara. The knowledge is present in our intellect, but it hasn't permeated our nervous system. It hasn't changed our immediate reactions. It reminds me of the digestion analogy mentioned in the sources. If you sit down and eat a plate of incredibly nutritious, vitamin-rich food, the mere act of swallowing it doesn't make you healthy. Eaten food does not nourish you. Only digested food nourishes you.
That is the perfect framework. Intellectual knowledge of your true nature, gained from the teacher, is just eaten food. It is sitting in your stomach. Nididhyasanam deep, assimilative meditation, is the process of digestion. The true purpose of this final stage of meditation is not to magically gain new knowledge. It is to digest the knowledge you already possess.
To really let it sink in.
Exactly. It is to consciously stall that continuous habitual slip back into the ego. You sit with the truth of your limitlessness, you dwell on it, you saturate every fiber of your mind with it, until that perspective becomes the dominant reality. You practice until the realization becomes effortless and spontaneous in your daily life. When the knowledge of your limitless nature is available to you effortlessly, even in the middle of a chaotic argument or a terrifying life event, that state is called sahaja samadhi, spontaneous, natural realization.
But the text also offers a really stark, almost frightening warning here about trying to hack this sequence. We live in an era of instant everything, including instant spirituality. People want the ultimate truth without the heavy lifting. What happens if someone hears about this ultimate knowledge, that the ego is just an illusion, that we are all limitless consciousness, and they decide to bypass the grueling work of karma yoga and upasana yoga? What if they just jump straight to the highest meditation?
This warning is arguably more relevant today than ever before. The text states that if you attempt to jump straight to the highest philosophical knowledge without doing the foundational work of cleaning and steadying the mind, a preparatory foundation called sadhana katastaya sampati, you do not become enlightened. You end up with something very dangerous, a loaded ankara.
A loaded ego. But wait, if they intellectually know that the ego is an illusion, how can their ego be loaded? Doesn't the knowledge destroy the ego?
Intellectual knowledge without emotional purity does not dissolve the ego. It weaponizes it. It inflates it to grotesque proportions. Think about the mechanics. If your mind is still completely full of malum, unresolved anger, deep-seated narcissism, desperate desire for superiority, and you introduce the ultimate teaching that you are the supreme universe, your unpurified ego will simply co-opt that profound truth to serve itself.
Oh, wow. So instead of I am the universe, therefore I am at peace with all things. It becomes, I am the universe, therefore I am superior to you.
Exactly. You become incredibly arrogant. You begin to use spiritual concepts to bypass your glaring emotional and psychological defects. You might mistreat people, act selfishly, or avoid all responsibility, and when confronted, your loaded ego will say, well, the world is an illusion anyway. The ego isn't real. Nothing matters. You use the vocabulary of enlightenment to justify your malum. You are still entirely reactive, selfish, and miserable, but now you have an impenetrable spiritual armor protecting your neuroses.
You become the archetype of the spiritual narcissist. The person who speaks in a hushed, Zen-like voice, but is an absolute tyrant to their family or their employees.
Yes. That is the loaded ahamkara, and that is exactly why the author of the Jiva Yatra is so pedantic about the sequence.
Yeah.
The sequence of the chisels is an absolute, non-negotiable psychological safeguard. You cannot handle the power of the ultimate truth if your container is dirty. You must clean the board with karma yoga. You must steady the board with upasana yoga. Only then can you write the truth, and only then can you safely digest the truth through nididhyasana.
That is a staggering psychological insight. It is a complete masterclass in human development hidden inside an ancient verse. We have covered an immense amount of philosophical ground today. If we take our own lion's backward glance to look at the territory we've just crossed,
Let's do it.
we started by forcing a pause to remember our actual orientation. We remembered that absolute peace, Vaksha, is not a city we are traveling to, but the very ground we are standing on. We identified the 3 layers of rock hiding that reality, the chaotic dirt of our emotional reactivity, malam, the buzzing, swinging distraction of our attention, vikshipa, and the core amnesia of our self-ignorance, avaranam. We learned that our intellect, our mind, is the only blackboard where this realization can occur, dismissing the myth that we must turn off our thoughts to find peace. And most importantly, we learned the precise sequence of the chisels, detaching from outcomes through karma yoga to clean the board, training our focus through upasana yoga to steady the board, and finally digesting the ultimate truth so we don't keep slipping back into the terrifying confines of our limited egos.
It is a flawless roadmap. It gives us the exact mechanism to stop being the tragic beggar sitting on top of the gold mine and empowers us to pick up the shovel and start digging.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We began by talking about how exhausted we are by the constant need to fix ourselves. The Jiva Yatra offers the most profound relief imaginable. It guarantees that you are fundamentally whole. You are already the treasure. You are already the masterpiece. There is absolutely nothing missing in your core architecture. So look at the reality of your life today. Look at your reactions in traffic, your stress over an email, your daily habits of distraction. What is just one specific layer of rock? Maybe it's a repetitive habit of picking up your phone to avoid a quiet moment, or maybe it's a stale, bitter resentment toward a family member that is thickening the mud on your blackboard that you can consciously choose to chip away this week. Not because you need to build a new, better version of yourself, but simply to let a little more of the masterpiece that you already are shine through. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep chiseling. We will see you next time.